Hello, everyone. On this podcast episode, I'm going to continue where I left off. I'm trying to explain absolute zero to you guys, as much as I can before I move on to other subjects. So, absolute zero, like I said it before, when you get to absolute zero, you do it, when you push an atom to slowly to absolute zero, to the point where it no longer moves, you're doing the opposite of what you think you're doing. You're building pressure. I stated this before, but I don't think I explained it properly. You're building pressure within that atom. You think you're taking pressure away. You think you're taking heat away. Because of the laws of duality, when something is taken, something is also added at the same time. When you're taking movement away, you're adding movement at the same time. Meaning the more you stop an atom from moving, the more you're forcing it to move. So you think you're stopping an atom from moving, but the opposite is actually true. You're building pressure within that atom. Sooner or later, you force that atom to move again. The more you pull something away, the more something gets added. Just like I stated before, with air. If you put air inside a container, right? You think, hey, the air inside the container is pressure, right? And air is pressure. There's a level of pressure within the container, and it's air pressure. It's not that great. So you think that, hey, I need to remove pressure from this container. Just like, scientists lower the movement of atoms, right? They lower the movement of atom, trying to get to absolute zero, trying to stop it from moving. They're doing the same thing that you do when you see air inside a container and you want to remove the air. You want to remove the air inside the container, right? So you start sucking the container. But you think, what you think you're doing is removing the air. What you're actually doing is actually putting pressure on that container. And if you put too much pressure on that container will, will implode. Will implode towards the direction air is going towards. So as you suck in air into your lungs, the container will slowly start to deform and move towards your lungs, towards your mouth. And that's how this world works. When something is removed, something must be added. Something must take its place. The act of you slowing down atoms, it's actually you building up pressure within that atom at the same time. And the more pressure gets built up within that atom, the higher the chance the atom will go back to its normal states. Extreme movement, it's like you're caging a bunch of air particles. You're caging a bunch of air particles, right? A bunch of gas. Let's just say gas. You encaged a bunch of gas inside an enclosed container, and you're slowly shrinking that container. Every time you slow down the movement of an atom, you're shrinking that container, and you're shrinking the container, and you're shrinking it. The moment you get to, absolute zero is when the container is at its most, its most pressurized state. And that's what you need to be careful of. The moment you get to absolute zero is when an atom is at its most pressurized state. Just like a container filled with air. Just like a container filled with gas. If you shrink a container and the same amount of gas is still in there, and you shrink it and you shrink it and you shrink it and you shrink it, at some point in time, the container will explode. If the pressure within that container is greater than the amount that the container can handle, the container will what? The container will explode, and all that pressure will escape from it. And that's what you need to be careful of within an atom as well. When you shrink, when you slow down an atom, you're putting pressure on that atom. An atom's natural state is is to vibrate, it's to move. So the more you stop it from moving, the more pressure you add into it, the more pressure builds up, the more heat is added, the more that atom moves. You think that atom isn't moving, but that's only from our perspective. From a different perspective, the atom is at its most pressurized state. And if that atom can't contain itself, all that energy within that atom, it'll explode just like a nuclear weapon. It'll explode just like a nuclear reaction. And that's what we need to be careful of, you know. Just because an atom does not, appears to not be moving, does not mean it's not moving. Just like outer space. From our perspective, outer space is empty. Doesn't it? Isn't it? No matter how much you look into space, it'll always appear empty. Space itself is empty from our perspective. But just because space is empty from our perspective doesn't mean that our perspective is the only perspective there is. There are multiple perspectives in this world. There's the equal and opposite perspective. And the equal and opposite perspective of an empty space is a space filled with energy, a space filled with things. An empty space isn't empty. Empty space is filled with a lot of energy. And that energy contains mass, a lot of mass. And that's what you need to be careful of. You're only seeing an atom from one perspective, the perspective where the atom is not moving. You're not seeing it from the equal and opposite perspective. And there is an equal and opposite perspective. The equal and opposite perspective is the atom is getting hotter and hotter. The colder an atom gets, the hotter it gets from a different perspective. And at some point in time, you'll slowly start to realize that the cold turns to heat. The atom could blow up and a massive eruption of heat would would escape from that atom. And that's what if you're someone who's into, who's into physics, quantum physics and all, this is what you need to be careful of, is that many scientists only see things from one perspective. Just as, flat earthers will only see the earth as flat. A flat earther is a flat earther because from their perspective, the earth is flat. Just like most scientists will see absolute zero as where, an atom is at its coldest. But just because the earth appears flat does not mean the earth is flat. Just because an atom appears to be still at absolute zero does not mean an atom is still at absolute zero. It only appears that way from our perspective, just like the earth only appears flat from our perspective. From the perspective of someone standing on planet Earth, the earth will always appear flat. But just because the earth always appears flat does not mean the earth is flat. Just because empty space looks empty does not mean empty space is empty. There's a different perspective. And from that perspective, empty space is filled with energy. You're inside a massive sea of energy. The earth is floating inside a massive sea of energy. The earth isn't floating in empty space, because empty space itself isn't empty. Nothing in this world is truly empty, because emptiness and fullness exist simultaneously as one. Because space looks empty, it automatically means space is full. Because the earth looks full, it means the earth is empty. These equal and opposites must exist simultaneously as one. And the earth is empty. Because the earth is full from our perspective. From the perspective of atoms, most of the earth is empty space. Vast reaches of empty space. It only appears full from our perspective. Just like space only appears empty from our perspective. These equal and opposites must exist simultaneously as one. So if you're someone who's doubting me when I tell you that, absolute zero is also when it's hottest, you just have to know that this world is a world of perspective, a world of duality. And if one aspect exists, its equal and opposite must also exist simultaneously as one. Something is both short and tall at the same time. From one perspective, it is short. From another perspective, it is tall. From one perspective, space is empty. From another perspective, space is full. So space is both full and empty at the same time. The earth, from one perspective, is full. From another perspective, it is empty. From one perspective, the sun is full. From another perspective, the sun is empty. The sun is filled with energy. The sun is also empty. From one perspective, the sun is hot. From another perspective, the sun is cold. From one perspective, a black hole is hot. From another perspective, a black hole is cold. From one perspective, you're standing on your right. From another perspective, you're standing on the left. From one perspective, you're standing, on the ground. From another perspective, the perspective of the moon. If you're standing on the moon and you look up, you'll see the earth, right? If you're standing on the moon is the ground and the earth is in the air. From one perspective, you're standing on the ground. From another perspective, you're standing in the air. You're floating. You're floating in the air. For someone who's standing on the moon, you are floating in the air. You're up high in the air. From another perspective, is the person standing on the moon that's in the air. The equal and opposites must exist simultaneously as one. If you're standing on the ground, you're also standing in the air. If you're not floating at all, you're also floating. If you're not moving at all, just like an atom at absolute zero, you're always moving. This world is a world where perspective determines a lot. You get deluded by perspective a lot. This is why they're flat earthers. Flat earthers will never believe that the earth is round, because from their perspective, the earth will always be flat. And perspective can be very deceiving. Just because you don't feel the earth move does not mean the earth is not moving. Just because you don't see an atom move at absolute zero does not mean an atom is not moving. Just because you see an atom move at extremely high temperatures does not mean an atom is moving. Perspective determines what's moving and what's not moving. There's an equal and opposite perspective to what we see. If an electron is negative from our perspective, from its equal and opposite perspective, it is negative. If a proton is positive from our perspective, the equal and opposite must be true. From a different perspective, a proton that's positive in our world, from our perspective, must be negative in a different perspective. So there's an equal and opposite of every single thing in this world. From our perspective, we are living things. From a different perspective, we're no different from rocks. Because the difference between us and rocks is not that much. A rock contains atoms. Humans contain atoms. A human body is made up of atoms. A rock is also made up of the same atoms. Atoms aren't alive, so humans can't be alive either. From one perspective, you're a living thing. From another perspective, you were never alive to begin with. This is how this world works. Perspective determines a lot. Perspective determines how you see the world. And both perspectives are true. The equal and opposites of everything are always true. If one perspective is true, its equal and opposite must be true as well. If a magnet is positively charged, a magnet is also negatively charged to something else. A magnet is positively charged to something and negatively charged to something else. And a magnet itself is both positive and negative. It has both positive and negative charges within it. That's how a magnet works. Because a magnet is what? Duality itself. And duality states that both opposites must exist simultaneously as one. One. That's it for today's podcast episode. I'll try to move on from this subject if I feel like I haven't, I've explained everything properly. And I'll continue trying to explain it in different ways until I feel like you guys have understood it. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.